Hello, let's talk about the full story behind the tragedy in South Carolina. We had a national tragedy, a tragic event where people lost their lives in a house of worship. And people both on the left and the right are trying to use it to their political agendas and warping it and desecrating the lives of those victims by making this political. That's outright wrong. So right now you're going to get the full story. First of all, let's talk about the right and the candidates who are attributing this to everything but racial motivation. How dare you? This individual stated his intention was to kill African Americans, that he wanted to start a race war. And you're trying to say, some candidates, that this was somehow related to the persecution of Christianity? It had nothing to do with Christianity. It was about killing people because of the color of their skin. And for you to suggest that this is related to the persecution of Christians in America is disgusting. And you better go before your God and confess your manipulation and your lies. To the other candidates that are saying that this was some sort of accident or incident and it was drug related, okay, there were possibly prescription pills involved, but you're skirting the issue because you don't want to talk about the ugly truth. And the ugly truth is that however much of a minority they are in this country, there are still racist, hateful people out there who will take people's lives merely because of the color of their skin. So let's talk about that. Let's talk about the full story. Let's talk about the right of every single American to go to a house of worship, be it a mosque, be it a synagogue, or be it a Christian church, and not be shot at. Now, in this case, it was more heinous because it was an act of worship, and people should feel safe worshiping the God and the beliefs they choose to have in their lives and practice their faith in safety in houses of worship that are considered sanctuary. For heaven's sakes, even in the vampire movies and things, houses of worship are always considered sacred places. And this individual, this sick-minded, hateful individual, violated one of the most sanctified concepts in humanity, that a house of worship should be sacred. But he did it because of hate and racism. Now, let's talk gun control. There are people on the left side of the spectrum, sorry I point it with my right hand, left side of the spectrum there, the far left, and the President of the United States. You know, when I heard that the President was speaking, I hoped for comfort and solace. I thought, good, he's going to speak to us. We really need the President to speak right now in this time. There's people's lives that have been affected. This is affecting all of us. We looked, just like during 9/11, we were looking for President Bush. We looked to Barack Obama for leadership, for guidance, to have words of assurance, words of comfort. Kind of started out that way, and he mentioned he was angry personally, and he knew the people involved personally. Well, that's a human emotion. It's good that the President shared that. But to turn this issue political, that takes away from the tragedy. That's like, it's hurtful that in a time of tragedy that the President of the United States turned this into a topic of gun control. That was wrong. Now let's talk about gun control. Let's talk about the full story. We have the right to bear arms in this country. It is guaranteed by the Second Amendment. Everybody's heard that one. Well, like it or leave it, or throw it out the window, it's in the Constitution of the United States. Every individual citizen has the right to bear arms. If you don't like that, change the Constitution. The Founding Fathers created an amendment process. They recognized that document needed to change with history. They created a process So the only people I've heard some sense coming from on the gun control end of things are the ones calling for a constitutional amendment to ban the right to bear arms. I'm not saying I agree with that, but let's stick with the Constitution. Let's not take the rights of individual Americans away and get rid of the Constitution. Let's follow our guaranteed rights and traditions, and if you don't like something that's written in the Constitution, there's a process to change that and repeal amendments. It's been done before with prohibition. It could be done with guns. If the majority of the American people was so passionate about giving up their weapons, we could do it that way. But let's have a real national debate and do it the right way. However, that being said, let's talk about the context of the Constitution. The right to bear arms. That document was written over 200 years ago. People did not have automatic weapons then. When the Founding Fathers, you have to look at the intent of the Constitution and the law. Okay? Just like the Founding Fathers did not foresee aircraft carriers and bombs, they did not foresee automatic weapons. So, the right to bear arms would be the right to own a handgun. That is the full story. Because there were not automatic and semi-automatic weapons back then. You had muskets and rifles and revolvers. So if you want to be a strict interpretation of the Constitution and talk about the Second Amendment guarantees your right to bear arms, well, then let's look at the context. It guarantees the right for revolvers and muskets. It does not guarantee, because it wasn't thought of then, the right to automatic weapons. Now, getting back to the President of the United States, let's talk about him and gun control. I already said he did the wrong thing. He politicized a national tragedy. That was wrong for his own agenda. And he divided the country further. That being said, let me address the other side of gun control. Yes, if nobody had guns, well, that person wouldn't have been able to get a gun, right? So that tragedy wouldn't happen. All these shootings that the president talked about wouldn't be happening if people just had no guns. See, there's a flip side to everything. Let's say there was an armed security guard or an off-duty law enforcement there. Some good guy with a gun would have saved lives. And that's the full story. Guns are not evil in themselves. They kill people, yes. But a good guy with a gun can take out a bad guy with a gun. And what they're not telling you, the proponents of gun control, is had there been somebody with a gun in that church that day, lives could have been saved. And that's the truth. That's the full story, no matter which way you look at it. The bad guy had a gun, but if there was a good guy with a gun, lives could have been saved. Now, finally, let's talk about real gun control and real solutions. Because the issue the president was raising was all these tragic shootings and the violence and how it doesn't have to happen anymore. I agree, it doesn't have to happen anymore. We're arguing about background checks. Drugs are illegal. Criminals still get drugs. A criminal will get a gun, one way or the other. You can't destroy and get rid of all the guns, no matter how hard you try, if they were made illegal tomorrow. The criminals would still get guns. You just have to look at the drug war to realize this. Drugs are illegal. Criminals still get drugs. You're not going to eliminate guns by making them illegal. Well, the criminals don't get their guns through background checks. So what do background checks do? They don't do anything. That's because they don't want a real solution. See, politicians don't want real solutions. They want to sidetrack you. How about this? Let's have a mandatory waiting period. Assuming you're for government intervention and you believe government is the solution to these things, which I, by the way, do not believe. All I'm asking is put forward a real solution on the part of the government. So if you want to run to the government to fix something, and you're saying the mass shootings are out of control and fearful and we have to stop this, and you want to look towards your government to a solution, then demand your government come up with a real solution. We know that these guns, the people who committed these acts, many of them had mental illness, and some of them had drug issues. They were deranged, psychotic individuals. Whether they fit the legal definition of insanity or not, whether it was premeditated or not, and most of these incidents were premeditated, carefully planned. They were sick in the head. They were mentally ill. So, if you want to have the government have a solution, then put forth real legislation to stop these mass shootings. How about requiring anybody that purchases a weapon to have a mandatory waiting period of, say, 30 days, a month. Now, I'm just shooting a number of days out there. It could be longer, it could be shorter. And in that time, require them to pay the expense for an evaluation by a licensed mental health counselor. After a couple of sessions with a licensed counselor or clinical psychologist or a psychiatrist, whichever way they want to do it, after a few sessions, if they're not right, something's likely to come out. And then require that counselor, that psychiatrist, that psychologist to sign off on their gun permit. Also, require a drug test. If they fail the drug test, they don't get the gun. Because I think we can all agree that people on drugs should not have access to guns. Criminality has nothing to do with it. We're not seeing mass shootings by murderers and thieves out there. We're not seeing it. We're seeing it by people who look to you and me like average folks who then commit mass acts of terror. On that topic, why has the government not redefined terrorism? Mass shootings are terrorism. Okay, in the 1920s and 30s, I believed, when bank robberies became an issue and people were terrified of bank robberies, the federal government passed legislation to make robbing a bank a federal offense. And they put it in the jurisdiction of the FBI. Well, if you want the government involved, let's do this right. Let's pass a new definition in Congress of terrorism to include any action that causes mass casualties. Because any action that kills people and puts people in terror, especially in fear of going to a public place, whether it's a shopping mall or a school or a religious house of worship, that's terror. That terrifies people. That causes panic. So let's redefine terrorism to make mass shootings, whether they occur in a school or a mall or any public place, let's make mass casualty events a federal offense, punishable by the death penalty, and in addition to that, let's put the FBI in charge as the lead agency, just like they did with bank robbery in the 30s. Immediately, when there's a mass shooting incident, we should have a federal team out there of FBI and law enforcement agents, and the Federal Bureau of Investigation should become the lead agency. In addition to that, now I'm normally against censorship and I understand First Amendment rights. Believe me, I am the first to protect freedom. But what we need to do, instead of talking about gun rights and background checks, is have a serious conversation about the national media being allowed to release these people's names. These killers want the attention. Let's just label it Shooter A, Shooter B, talk about the background, give the media their story, but don't put their name and face in public. It inspires the next guy. Now, I am not against taking away freedom of speech. I am for freedom most of the time. But I would argue in this particular case, it's an issue of national security. Just like they don't tell you the names of the so-called terrorists and they withhold other information. The media should be asked and held accountable when they're putting these guys' faces and names all over the TV, because the next one's waiting and watching that and making their plan. That's a serious conversation about what to do about mass shootings. And the President of the United States, every American should be outraged that he turned a national tragedy into a political event. That's wrong. He politicized and he divided this country. It should have been a day of comfort and national mourning where Americans were brought together by their president, not divided along party lines. That's wrong. That's outrageous. And now you have the full story.